a podcast to honor the gods.
This better come with a sacrifice.
Deus Ex Media.
Content Capable acknowledges the Indigenous people on the land on which we record this podcast, the Turungurung people. We offer our respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Sovereignty was never ceded. Welcome to Content Capable, where, as a network, I finally convinced all the rest of the podcast creators to start preparing months in advance, and now I'm the one who's behind schedule, apparently. I feel slightly called out, don't know what's going on there. If you're wondering who's panicking and overthinking about this, my name's Sam, I'm your host, and joining me today is Margaret. Welcome to the podcast, Margaret.
Hello. I'm supposed to be preparing months ahead of time for all my podcasts. Is that what's happening?
I hate preparing a podcast. Like, it's probably one of my least favorite things to do, especially someone who does this by myself. Like, I don't have a team or anyone else that relies on me for anything. So, it's my fault if an episode doesn't come out that week. I don't know. For the last 2 months, I've been really far ahead.
Nice.
And then, which is great, the problem with that is that then when something crops up, I don't know, a writer's strike, and you want to talk about, I don't know, a certain movie that came out that is on brand for the podcast, you don't necessarily feel super comfortable talking about it, and might have to push that episode to later. So for those who are wondering what happened to the Barbie episode, it has been recorded as of out, but I'm holding on to that one until after SAG-AFTRA and the WGA reach agreements, because there's no point in promoting work that is being struck at the moment. So
fair enough.
Join your union, everyone. But we're not here to talk about unions. We have to talk about something that's quite near and dear to my heart. Weird and interesting people. Margaret, could you give people a quick rundown of what your podcast is all about?
Sure. I run a podcast called Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff, which comes out every Monday and Wednesday. It's part of Cool Zone Media. And every week I pick another topic from history and talk about, what the people I consider to be cool people who did cool stuff, which includes a lot of unions, an awful lot of unions, basically labor history, feminist history, anti-colonial history, anything that pretty much, if there's oppression and then there's people who hate that oppression and then do something about it, whether they succeed or not, they're on my cool people list, and one day I'll get to them.
Cool. Almost just vividly reminds me of Carol Baskin, and just saying, "Hi, all you cool cats and kittens." So initially, what prompted you to make a podcast, especially chatting about people who are kind of pushing the envelope in that kind of way?
So I've been involved in political activism for about 20 years now. And the longer I'm involved, it's kind of cliche, but the longer I'm involved, the more I care about the history of it, and a little bit less that I keep up with what's happening currently. And I've become increasingly frustrated at, a lot of the books I was reading about it weren't exactly very entertaining. And it was very frustrating to me. And there's this one story in particular, and I haven't covered it on Cool People Did Cool Stuff yet. I'm waiting to. And it was this huge labor uprising in Patagonia. And it encompassed, thousands and thousands of people. And it was mostly immigrant anarchists and indigenous people, and they like took over the haciendas, and they were fighting for their rights, and they were betrayed, and it has all the makings of a movie. One of the characters is a bandit whose name is like, I don't remember, 67 or something. It's some number, and there's a poet who's like from the working class, but then she ends up marrying a newspaper magnate, and she ends up, giving away typewriters on street corners or sewing machines on street corners to women who are striking. And there's just all of these amazing stories in this one particular story. And I had never heard about this story. And I was just getting so frustrated that the way that people talked about radical history was boring. But these events are not boring. And so for a very long time, I've wanted to do this podcast. And then I'm friends with the Cool Zone Media folks. And so finally approached them and was like, look, I want to do a show. I want to call it Cool People Did Cool Shit. And they were like, well, we probably can't call it that, but you can do the show. And so now I run Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff.
Yeah. It's fascinating when you talk about radical history, because so often, as someone who's been in and around those spaces for a lot of my early 20s, it's been really annoying to sit there, to be honest. And I love, I worked at the longest running community radio station in Australia, and we're all about community activism and bits and pieces, but it's so easy to get bogged down in like the details and the boring bits rather than just like going, let's either A, tell this in an entertaining way, or B, find a different way to tell this story so that, we're not going to bore people out of, telling our story, which I think is probably such a really important part I find about modern activism, is that often it's got great, publicity, but quite poor communication.
Oh, that's such a good difference to draw. And I think that that's absolutely true, because people see it, but what it is about and why it matters isn't necessarily communicated. I like that.
Yeah, feel free to take it. Everything on here is free to use. It is. I think I've been reflecting on over the past few weeks, especially with the reactions people have to protest groups like Just Stop Oil, or here in Australia, Extinction Rebellion. They're very, big, environmental groups that do quite disruptive protests, like a union would, but in a way that people don't take away positively from.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's fascinating, and obviously your podcast does great work to kind of frame conversations like that in a more positive and more engaging way. Have you, when creating the podcast, what are some of the priorities you're focusing on?
In terms of what I'm picking, or in terms of how I choose to talk about it?
Well, to be honest, both. I don't know. Let's start with, in terms of what you're picking. How do you, make sure that you're going in a positive direction?
So, actually, one of the problems that I run into again and again, right? There are these great figures of leftist history, and it's usually these men, and then you'll get 3/4 of the way through the autobiography, and then they'll be like, "Oh, and he was absolutely terrible to his wife, and she hated him." Mm-hmm. And I'm like so frustrated, right? Because I might not have picked this man, right?
Yeah.
Or I would have chosen to tell the story in a different way. And so actually it ties together. And so I try to pick people, I try to focus on ensemble casts of characters and talk about movements instead of people. Sometimes this isn't true. Sometimes I pick people, right? And then I use people to frame the movement around them. And so sometimes I'm able to tell the story of a character that people have heard about again and again, but talk about it in a different way, in a way that is more inclusive to a larger a collection of people, like when I did Helen Keller, the famous deafblind woman who was a socialist who spent her entire life fighting for the rights of everyone, and that part is always left out of her story. And so I'm able to include that part of the story, but I'm also able to include the conversation about what she means to the disability community, which is largely negative, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, you also have to get all warts and all, which means I'm going to have to suddenly talk about the eugenics undertones or overtones of late 19th century and early 20th century disability rights movements and Helen Keller's complicity in that. And so I try to pick, but that's like an outlier, right? Picking something and framing it around a person. And that's necessary when there's a person who is the only point of entry that most people have for something. I prefer to talk about all of the people who are creating this history together, because the thing that drives me to care about history is this realization. When I was a kid, I didn't care about history. It was fine. I didn't hate it, but I was like, all right, whatever. And then I grew up in the American public educational system, and I had some very good teachers who tried to make it, tried to tell the truth, which is not very common in United States public education. I kind of rudely assume Australia is about the same, being colonial states that have a lot to cover up.
More similar than people realize, to be honest.
Yeah. And so I had some teachers who worked really hard to make it truthful and also engaging. It didn't really work. And it didn't work until I was engaged in activism. And I was engaged. And I had, ideological labels and concepts that I could frame my ideas around. And then I could look back at history. And so once I did, then I was able to look at history and see my place in it and recognize that my history is not just, I'm a white trans girl in the United States with people have probably noticed that I talk about Ireland a lot on my show because that's where I have the most family connection, right? Besides the United States. So, but the history that I feel like I am part of, that I am interested in, is not just my family history, but the history of people who believe similar things as me, not necessarily with the same label, who are fighting for things that I fight for. That suddenly makes me realize that we are all part of the grandest narrative that has ever been told. And all fiction and all history and all not narrative nonfiction is all telling little stories, but we are all part of this amazingly large and complicated story. And so finding out that story and piecing it apart suddenly has so much value to me, and I care so much about it. And so I pick the stories that I'm just like, oh, this is what I want people to know. And then there's other stuff too, right? Where I'm an anarchist, and I came out of the gate with a lot of anarchist history, right? Because that is what I knew about. But one of the things that I very consciously do is I'm not attempting to I'm not trying to force other people to accept my ideological positions, right? And so, I try to keep that to maybe a quarter, right, of what I put out. And by doing that, I'm actually learning a lot more about a lot more people than I would otherwise. And it's really opened my eyes to a lot of other struggles and how they all intersect. Sorry, I get kind of wide-eyed about this, but it's...
No, it's totally understandable. I don't know. To me, I always find, and it's not even just in podcasting, when I want to decide to research something or document something, at some point I take a step backwards and realize that there is way more to a history, a conversation, than I even can give credit for. And it is, you kind of step back with wide eyes, not wild eyes, and go, wow, that's just, amazing. Like, I'm sitting here and speaking to, this person, or, this history interacts with this history, and, it's a very nerdy thing, I think. I consider it quite nerdy, only because I'm a little bit of a history buff. Like, I love my history, but at the same time, it is so satisfying to watch it all kind of slot together quite nicely.
Yeah. Yeah, the number of things, the things I sometimes get the most excited about, stuff that I didn't realize tied all of history together. Like, I mean, some of it's bad, right? Like, I joke that tuberculosis is practically the sponsor of my show because I didn't realize that like half of, I'm making this number up, like half of people died of tuberculosis before antibiotics, and still a ton of people die of tuberculosis because of unequal access to care across the world. I live in a country where most people don't die of tuberculosis, but that was not the case 100 years ago, and certainly 150 years ago. And so I just like, it's like this angel of death that weaves every story together. And I had no idea. I just, like, by episode 5, I was like, why is everyone dying of the same thing?
No, yeah. It does, okay. Weird question. If tuberculosis is the sponsor of the podcast, does that by extension mean that John Green is the sponsor of your podcast?
So people send me a lot of John Green videos, and I'm always very happy about it because I love that there's an author who has taken their platform and just transformed it into talking about a real life issue that directly affects, like, I actually wish I talked more about, every now and then I'll kind of get into how tuberculosis is affecting people, especially when it's like, okay, so like the Young Lords were this Puerto Rican socialist movement in the United States. And in mostly New York City, they were in Chicago as well and some other places, and they started in Chicago. But one of the things they did is that there was no testing in the neighborhoods that they lived in for tuberculosis, and so people were being very affected by it. So they went and stole an ambulance that was like an X-ray machine ambulance and like drove it up to where they lived. And the people who ran the X-ray ambulance were like, yeah, cool, we'll X-ray your folks. We don't care. Like, we just want to stop people from getting tuberculosis. And I don't know, just ties everything together. I should totally have John Green on for an episode just about tuberculosis.
It kind of reminds me of like when the cartels start running their own healthcare and you go, oh, yeah, while, theoretically, like a lot of the things the cartels might do aren't super great.
Right.
They're still looking after each other. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that I run across again and again is a lot of the groups that I meet in history. I'm like, this is kind of a gang. Like the Young Lords started as a street gang. It was specifically preteen Puerto Rican kids who were getting tired of getting beaten up by the white kids, so they created a gang and started taking care of themselves and each other, and also did a lot of violent stuff, and then eventually became political. And it's just so interesting to me how power structures are all on some level the same. And you can do really good things with power structures, and you can do really bad things with power structures, and sometimes the same power structures do really good things and really bad things. And yeah, because if you control a region, you better make sure that the people in it have enough food to eat and don't die. Otherwise, what are you doing? And sometimes the small groups that control regions do it better than the big groups that used to. But that doesn't make them good or bad, right? That is actually one of the things I run across too, is that I'm like, when am I just being like, this gang rules? And then I'm like, wait, does it? Does this gang rule?
But they committed this many crimes and killed this many people, but they looked after themselves really, really well. So I don't know.
Yeah. I'm going to do an episode at some point. I think it's going to be a reverse episode my friend Miriam is going to do about the Jewish gangsters in New York City who stopped Nazi organizing in New York City. And were terrible people and gangsters, but they sure fought Nazis. And that's how I feel about the United States. So,
look, I think it is. I don't know. Jewish history has been an interesting, not hyper focus for me, but like an interesting sidetrack that I get onto fairly regularly, especially because I'm very slowly making my way through The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel at the moment, which amazing TV show, really, really well put together. But then you look at the way that the parents interact. It's like, this feels gang-esque. Like there is gang material going on here.
Oh, yeah.
And you just you forget that quite easily, a group can be doing both good and bad. And then, you know, at some point someone labels them a gang and then, then we just keep rolling.
Yeah. It's like, what's a cult and what's a religion? The other thing that I keep running across is forgotten radical history of Jewish folk. Jewish folks. I was going to say religious folks, but absolutely Jewish folks have also been a major focus of my podcast. But people do incredible things in the name of religion and people do horrible things in the name of religion. I grew up in a generation where we only focused on the negative things that religion was doing. And that makes some sense, but that's one of the things that, I keep coming up in history is people who use religious and or sort of cultural / ethnic organizing, because not all Jewish organizing that I run across is religious at all,
Yeah, I will argue with my extensive history with Catholics that the Catholics are very good at organising. You get a Catholic mother in to organise something, it's done in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
My siblings and I joke about it all the time. We just what was it? At one point, my brother was complaining that oh, this person's being a control freak. And I'm like, you got to realize they're a Catholic mother. They can't help themselves. They're going to cook and clean for you, whether you like it or not.
I mean, that's the other, I was raised sort of Catholic, and I have a lot of problems with the institution of the Catholic Church that I hope I am not afraid to talk about, and I'm willing to talk about quite a lot. But one of the things I keep running across is Catholics who threw down super hard, and took care of people. And, in the same that I keep running across Jewish organizations and Muslim groups and individuals and organizations, yeah.
Do you find it hard sometimes, especially when you're doing your research, to avoid, especially, I really hate saying this because it makes people sound dumber than they are, but the US indoctrination and biases that have, and propaganda that has kind of permeated, especially US culture, but also to an extent Western culture as well, the vilification of Muslims and, the oppression of queer people and bits and pieces. Have you found that has been a bit hard to kind of find a way to talk about things without, running the same lines that, the US government did when they convinced everyone that Muslims are bad people?
Yeah, I mean, what history is available is controlled so much by that. And I think that I think a lot about what my biases are and what the biases of my audience might be, because I specifically am not trying to, one of my goals with this podcast is to not only speak, I'm trying to preach to the choir, right? And I want to talk about cool radical history in a very inclusive way where I'm trying to say you can be part of this too. No one was born, politically radical or whatever. And yeah, I think that I run across this a lot. And actually one of the biases that I'm often expecting my audience to have is anti-religiosity, being anti-religious. And because I came up anti-religious with exceptions, right? I knew all of these cool organizers who were coming at it from all of these different religious perspectives. But there was this firewall between atheist radical organizing and the Catholic left or, Jewish or Muslim organizing. And where I live, I haven't been exposed to it. I mean, obviously there's many other religions, right? Besides, these three.
It's very easy just to talk about the Abrahamic faiths, let's be honest.
Right, totally. And it's where I live, there are the overwhelming majority of people who are religious. But I'm actually working against my own biases against that kind of stuff. And, and yet I keep running across again and again these stories of the number of people who convert to Islam and that's how they spend the rest of their lives, and you're oh, I can't write that out of the story, right? There is clearly something that is appealing to people who are doing amazing work to end up doing that, right? Sinead O'Connor, who just died, who I haven't done an episode about, but will probably end up on an episode soon, like converted to Islam at the end of her life. And her quote about it is that like, this is where independent theologians end up, you know? I'm misquoting, I'm paraphrasing, not from memory, but, and that is absolutely the kind of bias that I worry about people wanting to ignore that, you know? What were you going to say?
No, it is a fascinating thing. And I think in societies like Australia and the US where, well, I haven't checked US census data, but in Australia, our latest census data came out about a year ago. And it's the first time that less than 50% strongly identified with a religion.
Cool.
And so it is, you know, a very fascinating statistic to see as, you know, the population of you know, especially Western countries start removing themselves from religion.
Right.
But at the same time, also realizing that religion still permeates through a lot of the conversations and organizing. Like, you know, we can't forget that the Catholic Church runs so many charities that help the homeless, or, you know, the Salvation Army, or, you know, and I can't think of a Jewish or Muslim or, you know, any other religions examples, but there are religious organizations often are the backbone of our social care, not industry, but, you know, backbone of social care. And when we go to collectively bargain, we have to remember that, you know, the Catholic Church has been collectively bargaining, you know, since they you know, sit for forever, and so has the Jewish community and, you know, the Muslim community as well. And, you know, watching your Muslim every now and then you watch a very interesting report or investigation about, you know, the way that Muslim communities cooperate with law enforcement or bits and pieces to make sure that A, their communities are safe, but B, that they are also, you know, putting people in a safe space and identifying people, you know, when they might be a threat to the wider society. And it's very fascinating to sit there and go, we talk about, you know, collective bargaining as maybe a radical or, you know, a little bit more of a anti-capitalist kind of thing. And we've got to remember that it has its roots, you know, spread everywhere, and everyone else, you know, has collectively bargained at some point in their life. Yeah, absolutely. And that also, even as like religion tends to go down, I'm seeing in like my personal circles, I'm seeing this regrowth of cultural affiliation rather than religious affiliation with what is traditionally considered a religion. I think that my Jewish friends are ahead of the curve on this, you know, and whether or not they're religiously Jewish, an increasing number of my Jewish friends are like, well, I'm culturally Jewish, and that matters, and it matters in all the following ways, you know. And here's the way it... Yeah, I think that it's just... the more I read about all this stuff, the more I realize it's just all complex. There's just people trying to do some of the basic things to take care of each other, and they use whatever language and context is available to them to do it. Yeah. Do you ever, like... Obviously, this conversation has been incredibly intersectional. Do you ever struggle to have an intersectional conversation like this about a topic that you're covering in a way that kind of does it justice through a podcast means, I should say? No, that's a really good question. And like, you know, when you say the Salvation Army, for example, I think like, oh, those homophobes, right? That's like my first thought, right? And, you know, I suspect people have guessed based on my voice and my name, not necessarily matching up to conceptions, but I'm a trans woman. And, you know, where I live right now in the United States, that's increasingly, and I'm also a rural, I live rurally, I live in West Virginia, which is a state with all kinds of cool radical history and exists because they didn't want to secede from the nation to defend slavery in the 1860s. But it is a very conservative area. And, you know, and so I hear Salvation Army and my first thought is like, oh, those homophobes, I don't give them money, you know? But I'm like, yeah. But I recognize that people are trying to do what they can in different contexts and different situations. And
in terms of how I can cover things intersectionally, the thing that I have the hardest time doing is how extensively women are written out of history, whether cis or trans. Women are just not included in history books, including radical, labor, anarchist, whatever you want history. It's going to be a bunch of like, and then his wife was there too. And I'm like, you mean the woman who was shooting, shooting fascists? She doesn't deserve a name. This isn't just like she was at home making food, as if that doesn't make the movement possible, right?
Yeah.
It's called reproductive labor in Marxist theory, and I hate that name because it makes people think that it's about having babies, but reproductive labor means like reproducing the concept of life, like allowing the way of life to continue by like cooking and cleaning and stuff, right? It's this labor that gets ignored. That stuff matters too, but that's not even all that women were doing. And we're written out of history constantly. LGBT people are written out of history constantly. And it gets messy, right? Because what it means to be gay or trans or cis or hetero has changed over time, right? And people are afraid of that complexity. They're afraid to say, oh, that 19th century woman who lived alone except with women her entire life was a lesbian, right? Because she might not have identified as a lesbian. She also may or may not have been sleeping with her historically close friend, right? And we don't know because it's not goddamn talked about. And historians in particular have often left those things out because people don't want to like say anything that will be controversial outside of the point that they're trying to make. The other to use the clearest example, the thing that I have to work the hardest to reintroduce is sex work, right? Sex workers are written out of history constantly. And the fact that a large number of people throughout history have used sex work, particularly women, particularly LGBT folks, but not exclusively by any stretch, that isn't written about because it's not polite. And if you want to tell, if you're in 1910 and you want to tell a flattering story about Louise Michel, the like guardian angel of the Paris Commune, the saint of anarchism, the whatever you want to like call her, right? And she did all this amazing fighting, and she was probably gay as hell, but we don't know. She was just always with historically close friends, and so we just don't know these things, and so the best we can do is conjecture. It's very frustrating.
It is. And like part of me sometimes is like, oh, I kind of wish we could go back in history and kind of go, well, and it feels very invasive. Were you gay? Were you,
right?
Is this your girlfriend? Please tell me. So we've got
yes or no.
It's like when you're in like middle school and you like, in Australia, you instead of sending a note, you would give someone your eraser, and you would have like etched into it like,
Whoa.
"Do you like me? Yes, no," or something. We're destructive people here in Australia, whatever. But it does remind me of that. Like, do you like me? Yes, no, tick box.
Yeah. Do you like girls? Yes, no. Yeah.
Please tell me. I need to know.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to come to terms with as well. Like sometimes they go, we just don't have a complete picture, and it's okay to not have a complete picture. Like there's no real need to kind of to have a perfect picture. A, human history isn't perfect, and B, no one's going to write everything down, unfortunately, as much as I'd like to argue otherwise.
Right.
Not every part of every person's personal life is going to be aired in the Daily Mail. But,
we can hope.
I'm a journalist, and I will say I am anti-Murdoch, and Murdoch owns a lot of newspapers in Australia.
Yeah.
It is like dancing around a minefield.
Are your all's libel laws like the UK's or like America's?
Neither, actually.
Ooh.
So, I always forget. I'm going to just quickly check something real quick. So our laws are stricter than both countries. It is
Damn,
so
stricter
easy
than the UK.
to win a libel case. Yeah, like you.
I don't want to be a journalist
We
in
are.
there.
It's so easy to like, and we just operate under constant state of terror. Anything mildly controversial, like the boss reads and goes, "Okay, do we think we can get sued for defamation for this?" I've had stories cut. I've had stories edited. We've gone, yeah, that's a step too far. When we cover court, we don't tell. And admittedly, I work for a small rural publication, and so like we just like we don't want to, we don't have the resources that a national broadcaster or a national newspaper does have. And we don't want to be sticking our necks out too far. There are some very rich people in our town who would be more than willing to take us to court if we did something that really, really pissed them off.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating thing.
There's nothing that makes me like, I am not a very patriotic person, to put it as lightly as possible. I believe that the United States should be dissolved and returned the governance of the area returned to the indigenous tribes and nations, but there's nothing that makes me like pull out the stars and stripes like when someone from the UK is threatening to sue, like a trans person in the United States or whatever, right? And the trans person is able to be like, "I'm in the United States. We have free speech. Fuck off."
I will say, and this is probably a little bit more, nationalism as well. It's a weird one where I look at like the US's free speech, how powerful. I want to say the Second Amendment. I'm guessing that one's the guns.
Second Amendment's guns. The very first one is free speech.
Free speech.
Yeah.
Anyway, I look at the First Amendment and I look at the way it's interpreted in some contexts, and I just get really mad. I'm like, that person should be paying millions of dollars to that person.
Okay, that's true.
What they said about them.
No,
There's a happy medium that no one is at here, and it is frustrating to say the least.
Yes, it's true. But every now and then I I don't really commit a lot of crimes. I'm a very public figure, even though a lot of the people I talk about commit a lot of crimes. And every now and then I'll say something on air and I'll contact my lawyer and I'll be like, "Am I in trouble?" And usually their response is like, "The very First Amendment says that you're allowed to have said that." And I'm like, and there's a little bit like, maybe you should avoid saying that, but
Yeah, definitely. Like, I've definitely had conversations on here where I then have gone back editing and gone, well, I'm just going to cut out this section because it encourages this. And I'm not sure whether A, an employer, or B, my someone would take that the same way that I would.
Yeah.
Is that in jest? Is it not? And I don't know. This is what happens when you work you're a working professional in a very, very public industry with not a lot of people involved. Journalists are very insular, at least here in Australia, and it is annoying sometimes. Like, even the fact that, like, I mentioned Murdoch. I will say, personally, I am not a fan of the way that Murdoch conducts business. I'm not a fan of his publications. I lived in Queensland, which is 90% of the news publications are owned by News Corp. And I've had conversations privately with people about the way that interacts with what jobs I'm going to apply. But I will never say publicly, like, what I would do or how I would interact with that corporation if I have to.
Totally.
On a day-to-day basis, or if I get employed by them, or or if I'm going to apply for a job with them, because A, I don't want everyone to know exactly everything about my own personal life, but B, also at the same time, it's like, and it's a hard thing, especially when you're covering, radical things, or you work for radical organizations, or, there's a whole variety of bits and pieces. It's a hard thing to kind of go, I've got to draw a line in the sand in here somewhere, but I also want to draw a line where my privacy sits as, you know,
Right.
do I tell everyone the whole length of that line, or do I only tell them this little bit here? You know, I have problems with the way News Corp conducts business. I'm not going to comment on their journalism.
Right.
And, you know, by not commenting, even then, like, I'm almost putting an opinion out there because there is a common consensus, at least in, you know, in the general Australian community about, you know, the publications that are put out. And it's, I don't know, it is a fascinating bit. And I feel sorry for any politician who has to go through this on a daily basis because that's too hard.
Yeah, I think about some of this stuff a lot, and obviously my context is so different, but it's like Cool People Did Cool Stuff is published by iHeartMedia, which is, at least in the United States, the largest radio, news, whatever conglomerate, I don't know the right words here. It is a giant evil company, right? And, you know, it is the kind of it's the kind of institution that many of the people that I talk about are in conflict with. And I just think that it's like, I really appreciate that we live in a time where anti-capitalism, you know, I'm anti-capitalist. I don't think is a good way to structure society and the economy. I'm really happy that we live in a time and place where that conversation doesn't mean, so therefore the person who works at Starbucks is bad, right? And instead says, like, therefore the person who works at Starbucks needs better job protections and we support their union and things like that. And iHeart is actually unionized. I'm freelance, so I'm outside of that structure. But, you know, I'm very happy that they're unionized. It makes me feel less conflicted about working for them. And for them, you know, they give me the platform to say that the economic model that they participate in is bad because me saying so brings in ad revenue and makes them money. And it's like, everything's messy. No one has their hands clean. Certainly not anyone who's trying to speak to large audiences and change the way that conversations happen.
Was there ever a point where you felt disenfranchised with, like, and it's so easy to kind of go, were you ever disenfranchised completely with capitalism? But, like, you know, in the way that, like, oh, you know, nothing's ever going to get better, so why try? Like, I've definitely, personally at least, I've felt that. But, you know, have you ever felt that way? Weirdly, no. And okay, so, and I'm half lying, I'm half telling the truth, because it's a thing that I tell myself in order to be effective. Like, one of the main things that I try to do is promote a sort of cynical optimism, right? I believe that the only way that people have successfully made change is by believing that they can have an impact. And not necessarily think that they're going to win, right? Like, desperate concentration camp up revolts, right? Or, you know, I don't think, I haven't done a Nat Turner episode yet, but Nat Turner, who led a slave revolt in the American South in ye olde slavery times, you know, I don't know whether he was like, we're going to win, as much as he was like, we're going to fuck up these people who enslaved us, right? And so that is a valid thing too. But overall, I think that an optimism that we can do something worthwhile, whether that thing that we're trying to do that's worthwhile is make change or act nobly within our own ethical frameworks, whether or not that kills us, right? I think that is the most useful way to engage. I don't think, for example, we're literally not going to stop climate change from happening because it is already happening, right? There's no, this month in particular, at least in the, well, not actually, it's the hottest month on record, even on the other hemisphere. I mean, overall, you know, clearly we're not going to stop climate change. We can stop climate change from getting worse, right? But it's still worth engaging in because, well, it's not like any of us were going to get out of this life alive anyway, right? You know,
And so I think that an optimism, even if it is a cynical optimism, is the best way to approach things. And it helped. One of the reasons why I say I never had this problem is that I started off, I joined the anarchists, and for anyone who's listening, this doesn't mean I'm like, oh, let's burn everything. Instead, it's like, let's create a horizontally structured society in which we take care of each other, right? That's the...
Yeah.
And so we lose a lot, right? And
we're not very good at winning, let's be honest.
Yeah, and we've had to redefine winning, right? And so the times that I have spent where I feel like I am with a community that is working as equals to confront very bad things and having successes along the way are what make life worth living, rather than like, I would love to go to my bed 80 years old. I could live longer than 80. This is my fantasy version. 117, I'm going to die in a society with no authoritarian structures and no oppression, right? That suits me just fine. But like, I don't think that's going to happen, right? And so why do I still fight for that? And the answer is, it makes life beautiful.
Yeah.
So.
No, yeah, exactly. I think that so often, and I definitely, when I felt this was, I had a conversation with an Indigenous person who worked at the radio station I was working at for the last 3 years. And he was an anarchist, and we were talking about, we're about to have a referendum as a nation about recognizing Indigenous people in our constitution. Not only are we for the first time acknowledging that Indigenous people exist in our constitution, but we're also going to enshrine like a direct voice to our federal parliament in that constitution.
Cool.
And that is the plan. Now, is it going to plan? It's not going to plan. Very clearly, it's not going to plan. There are a whole bunch of things going wrong at the moment. But when it was first initially announced in May last year, I was very excited as someone whose father grew up on an Indigenous mission out in the middle of the outback, as someone who has such mad respect for Indigenous artwork and culture, and the fact that the longest continuous surviving culture in the world still exists and is still proud and, here,
rules.
And it's still fighting for itself, is amazing. And I'm like, yes, I'm here for it. And that excitement sometimes spills over, and that's great. And if you're Australian and you are in October still on the fence about voting, if you're unsure, vote yes. Like, at this point in time, voting yes is like a good start, and then we can sort out everything else later.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But
my rant. But like, he turned around to me and he was like, this is just pandering to us so that we can't. And this is part of there's two no campaigns to this constitutional amendment. One of it is the racist one, which we won't talk about.
Right.
But the other one is this very intersectional argument of like, this isn't good enough. Like, we need more. And, some people are asked for complete, sovereignty and reparations first before we establish a voice to our federal parliament to consult on all things that, and so it's been this very fascinating situation where I've watched a intersectional conversation attempted to be had in both our nation's media, but then also, I had my brother ring me up a couple of weeks ago and goes, I've been hearing a lot about this stuff. Can you explain to me what's going on and where the arguments are coming from? And so I did. I sat down and I said, well, this is what's supposed to be happening. This is what we're proposing to change to the Constitution. And here is why some people are saying we should vote yes. And here's the two reasons why people are voting no. And then I was like, at least from my perspective, the safe bet is to vote yes, and then we can sort stuff out later.
Right.
We're white people, we're not experts on this. I'm trying to listen to as much as I can, but at the same time, it's very easy to like let a dissenting voice completely like take over what you have said.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's been fascinating. It's been a fascinating time to sit and try to figure out what has been going on.
No, and it actually sounds like, I mean, what you're doing when you're talking to your brother is the thing that I think that journalists should be doing, which is like, you have an opinion, and that is an okay thing to include, and yet also being able to, as much as possible, be like, well, and here's all the sides. Here's where I lay after looking at all the sides, but here's all the sides. And that's like, I think that that's the most honest way to make anything better, is to not convince people of our, people think that they're on the debate team, whereas actually the goal is to give everyone enough information so that they can make the decisions that they feel are ethical and strategic,
Yeah, exactly. And it would, I don't know, it's going to be an interesting conversation throughout the next few months and years. But as you said, we've got to continue having optimism, through it all, acknowledging the fact that, some things aren't going to go our way. We're not necessarily going to make change, A, instantaneously, or B, always completely effectively. And that's just something we've got to acknowledge.
Yeah. Well, and just to keep talking about that one issue, it's like, I can absolutely see both sides. Well, both of the good sides, not the bad side. And it really is a matter of whether or not people think that if the referendum passes, people are going to be like, and we're done. No more racism. The Australian government is now legitimized and it's now anti-colonial, right? And not actually fundamentally change things, right? And if so, I understand the perspective of being like, well, to hell with that. And then versus the thing of saying like, can we? I think that the challenge is to get the yes voters to see it as a path along the way, rather than trying to convert the no voters of the, especially like, like being like, all right, is this going to be, we have the same thing in the US, right? Where it's like, Biden, right, is the most center ineffectual, whatever, but he's just like literally not a fascist. And like, so a lot of people are like, well, we prefer not a fascist to a fascist. And that is a very reasonable position to take. And what our goal should be is to be able to say to people being like, well, is that enough? Is voting enough?
Yeah.
Right? Can voting make the changes? Is what's available on the ballot everything we need? And if it's not, what are the other methods by which we organize, right? What are the other methods that we support Indigenous people and work on, anyway, that's,
it's totally valid. And I think that, if anyone takes away anything from this, I think it's that like, there are more people out there fighting for things that you believe in than you think.
Yeah.
And people aren't alone. We're humans. We all probably think the same way anyway. So, let's be honest, there's probably someone there who thinks the same thing as you.
Yeah.
Well, Margaret, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been so fascinating to chat with you. I want to chat with you for like 3 hours at this point. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. You're good at your job, so I appreciate it.
Oh, look, I'm glad I can get people talking. Writing it down, not always my forte. Let's be honest. I hit a very bad writer's slump middle of this week, and we are mildly understaffed at the moment as of recording, and it was mildly terrifying.
Yeah.
It's like, I need to get these stories out because there's no other stories. There's no one else writing stories in the office. Anyway, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, I guess if you go to my link tree, which is whatever, it's Linktree, Margaret Killjoy. And that has everything, probably, unless I haven't updated it. My newest thing, I hate Twitter. I'm on it. It is my largest platform. I have enjoyed Twitter at various points in my life, but I'm not having a good time with it right now. And it's not even called Twitter anymore, but I'm going to keep calling it Twitter. Speaking of people that I don't have positive opinions about, like the guy who owns it. And what I'm trying to say is that I've started a Substack. A Substack is a newsletter, and what I do is I write a new piece every week. Half of the weeks are reflections on history and theory and politics and all that stuff, and especially preparedness. I'm really into individual and community preparedness. And then the other half, and those are all free. And then the other half are for my paid subscribers, and they are my journals of my time as an activist and a squatter and a punk and all that stuff. So Substack, that's the best way to find me. I'm also on Instagram. I'll probably keep that one around. I mostly just post pictures of my dog there. What about you? Where can people find you? What were you going to say?
No. I was about to say I'm probably considering doing some sort of fairly regular email thing myself, just because I find it a better way to communicate a bit more long form than the various social medias. As a reminder for everyone who might be either listening to this for the first time or didn't hear the announcement many, many months ago, Deus Ex Media is not on Twitter. We are going to We're going to continue to call it Twitter because the bad man continues to like to call things by the new name he's tried to instill in it. And it never really lasts that long. So we'll just keep the name how it is to start with. But you can find me on Instagram and on TikTok at sam.the.journalist. And professionally, I'm still on Twitter. Look, I'm not putting a huge amount of content on there. You'll find more interesting content on Twitter, like how I had a mild mental breakdown last night as of recording about packing for a trip in 5 days' time to go overseas. So,
wait, you said you'd find more useful information where? You said Twitter, but I think you meant somewhere else like Instagram or something.
Oh, TikTok.
TikTok.
Sorry. Yeah,
okay,
TikTok.
Cool.
I exist on TikTok, unfortunately, much to the endless teasing and chagrin of my fellow co-hosts on the Deus Ex Media Network. And you can find the podcast at Content the Letter N Capable. Where can people find your podcast, Margaret?
If you look up cool people who did cool stuff, you'll find it wherever you get your podcasts, and it's part of the Cool Zone Media Network. I also have a second podcast about individual and community preparedness that comes out every Friday. It's not on iHeartMedia. It's an independent podcast, and it's called Live Like the World is Dying. So if you want to hear about history, cool people did cool stuff. If you want to hear me interview experts about canning and conflict resolution and all working together to mitigate the impacts of climate change and the global rise of fascism, Live Like the World is Dying.
Yeah, I love it. Hopefully one day alien species will come to our planet, have a listen, look at all the podcasts we've created and all the things and go, wow, this is a great record of kind of human history.
Yeah. Or we'll lose all of everything that was created only digitally will be lost forever, and people will think that a dark age started in the year 1990.
Yeah. My greatest fear.
Yeah.
Has there been anything that you've been reading, watching, or listening to that you wanted to plug?
Oh, no, I can never... whenever anyone asks me this, my brain just turns off. So I just... I'll plug a couple books that I'm really excited about by folks that I know. One of them is Raw Dog by Jamie Loftus. Jamie Loftus is a podcaster and a comedian who wrote a book that's a history of hot dogs, and it upsets all of the right-wing people because they're like, I thought this was going to be about hot dogs, but it actually includes the labor conditions of how hot dogs are made. But it's really entertainingly written. Jamie Loftus is an amazing writer and ties together a lot of different types of stories, including whether or not people have sex in those hot dog-shaped cars. The answer is yes. And then the other book that I have sitting on my like to read list that I'm really excited about, it's called Fight Like Hell by Kim Kelly. Kim Kelly is a journalist, a labor journalist in the United States who maybe I like because also comes from the background of like metal and stuff like that. But Fight Like Hell is a collection of stories about labor history, and Kim Kelly is an amazing writer, so I can't wait to pick that one up.
That one sounds super exciting. I do love we're massively union strong here in Australia, cool. So always love a bit of union history, a bit of union stuff.
Tell me an Australian story that I should cover. Besides, eventually I'm going to do Ned Kelly. Is Ned Kelly actually a bastard, or is he a cool Robin Hood? And is there another story about Australia that I should cover?
Okay, the Ned Kelly thing's great, and I'm going to give you like the ultimate Reader's Digest. So I live in Mansfield in regional Victoria, which is right around the actually our court was the one that sentenced his mother to death.
Wow.
Because he killed 2 police officers in town here. So this town hates Ned Kelly because like he killed 2 police officers, and at that time the police officers were protecting the white landowners. So of course, you know, the town, you know, of mostly white people, you know, hates Ned Kelly.
Right.
But like everywhere else in the country, we're incredibly proud that Ned Kelly exists because like he's ultimate Robin Hood figure. But I didn't realize how conflicting it was until I moved here. So I was like, oh gosh, I can't like, you know, make jokes about Ned Kelly anymore because they all hate him.
Cool.
Most of our offices, but other Australian stories. Always a good one is the Emu War and the complete shit fuckery that was that.
Okay.
Of like soldiers not having anything to do post World War One, and then going, let's go fight a whole bunch of emus in Western Australia.
God.
I'm trying to think of some other very funny histories. Oh, yes. So in Queensland, so we don't have governors or anything. We have premiers, and Premier Joe Bioki Peterson, Joe is J-O-H, he was the longest serving Premier of Queensland, and he basically instilled a police state in Queensland, and the shenanigans that they got up to, like a little bit disappointing, but like fascinating. And there's a cult around him. There's this conspiracy theory that he never actually died. When he actually died, he had like absolute control. The police force was completely corrupt. Right when, of all things, community radio, because at the same time, Gough Whitlam, you know, the most uber Labour, so uber Labour that he got kicked out by the Queen, was in power at the same time federally. So it's this fascinating like period of time where, you know, the police were running around doing all this corrupt stuff, and the politicians were basically became a royalty because, you know, Joe had an absolute control over the whole state. And just like stupid shit like burning down bars and bits and pieces. I always find it hilarious. I think that's because I like finding hilarity in the morbid, but that's all good.
Cool. Okay.
Awesome.
That's some good. Thanks for the tips.
No, yeah, and always more than happy to give more Australian stories. Off the top of my head, those were the few ones that I could remember. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been such an amazing
it's been a pleasure.
time. Oh, I forgot to plug my thing.
Yeah.
Other than those random history things, I've got a link to an amazing yaki udon recipe down at the bottom of the description of this podcast. It is my go-to like lazy meal. I just make sure I have udon noodles sitting in the pantry at all times, and whenever I'm feeling super lazy, this one's a great throw together to use up a whole bunch of vegetables. So
cool.
Content and Capable was recorded, edited and produced by Samuel O'Brien. You can follow the podcast at Content, the letter N, Capable on Instagram, and you can find it on Facebook. You can also send an email through to contentandcapablepod@gmail.com with any of your thoughts, queries or concerns. The best way to support the podcast is to leave a review on your preferred podcatcher so more people can hear the podcast. The art was done by Opia, and the music was written, edited and produced by Jason Hilton. Content and Capable is proud to be a part of the Deus Ex Media Network, where you can find a podcast for any of your nerdy interests.
Hey, what's up? My name's Christina, and I'm the host of The Restricted Section, which is a super pro-trans rights, Harry Potter slander, Harry Potter book club podcast in which all of those weird kids you went to high school with are still reading the damn thing, but now we don't like it as much. Come along with us as we break down this classic fantasy series and show you how it is actually extremely problematic, not only the author, but also the text itself. We should have known. We were so young and innocent. If only we could have trusted the adults who were writing the things that we put into our brain. But anyway, don't get me wrong, we enjoy Harry Potter, we have a good time. We're currently covering Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, which is probably for the best because I don't really remember any of that book, despite the fact that I've read it probably 10 times. Come along with me into the world of Harry and take a intersectional feminist lens, a racial justice lens, a queer rights lens, all the lenses that the author proudly wishes we wouldn't use to break down this book to figure out why we love it and why it's bad. New episodes every Wednesday wherever you get podcasts.
Thank you for listening to Content and Capable. Don't forget to rate and review, and we'll see you next week for another episode.
Deus Ex Media.